Good evening all and welcome to Ghost Week. I've got a new episode from Monday to Friday. Ghost stories all week. So get comfortable and let the phantoms take control. It was September in central Idaho. Autumn had come to the mountains, and with it, bow hunters looking for mountain goats. My cousin Vern is an avid hunter. He's been all over North America hunting various game, bears in Alaska, wild hogs in Texas, bighorn sheep in Wyoming. But his favorite hunting area was the Lemmy Mountain Range in central Idaho. Our extended family has been hunting in those mountains for generations. We know every river bottom and mountain peak, like many people know their own neighborhoods. Mountain goats are a fascinating animal to hunt. They live well above the tree line in rocky environments, and are sure-footed and can climb near vertical slopes. Hunting these animals requires one to venture into these dangerous areas. You have to be mindful as you pursue an animal like that. One wrong step on a rocky slope, or one loose rock, could mean you're never going home again. Vern was an expert mountain hunter. It's something he was born to do, and he decided to hunt in the Hayden River area of the Lemmis. It's a familiar spot to most locals, and the area is home to plenty of mountain goats. The first mile of his hike was uneventful as he climbed up the canyon. The air was crisp, and his breath formed in great plumes as he progressed. The sun was just peeking over the mountains when Vern came to a small deer trail. He decided it might be a nice shortcut from his usual route, and took it. A few hundred feet up the trail, he saw something odd pop out from behind a tree. It was a man dressed in a light denim coat and jeans who was carrying a small backpack. My cousin stopped for a second to get his bearings, unsure of where the man came from. He waved at him with both arms. One of them was holding an older-style hunting bow. Acknowledging him, Vern waved back. Although the man looked to be physically fine, it was clear he was in emotional distress. He yelled out something my cousin couldn't quite hear and waved his arm, indicating my cousin should follow him. Vern didn't get any bad vibes from this man and could tell he was genuinely in need of some help. He began to make his way up the canyon, following this mysterious man. Vern could never gain any ground on the guy. He was always just far enough that he couldn't talk to him. Periodically, the man would stop, turn towards him to make sure Vern was still following, and every time he looked back, Vern could see the concern on his face. My cousin did his best to remain calm and keep a smile, unsure who or what he was being led to. It was peculiar, Vern thought as he hiked. He hadn't seen any other vehicles on his drive up to the trailhead. Perhaps he came in from another ridge. What could he possibly be leading him to? He figured one of his hunting parties had been hurt and needed help. Of course, he wouldn't have had to speculate if the man would have just stopped and spoken to him for 5 minutes. Vern lost sight of the guy just past a turn in the trail. The trail opened up into an incredibly steep, rocky talus slope. He looked in every direction and could not locate the man when he heard a whistle. Looking up, he saw the guy about 500 feet up the rocky slope waving at him. There was no possible way he could have gotten up that far in just the short time Vern lost sight of him. He still didn't feel any fear or wariness about this strange situation, though. The man was waving more frantically now, practically begging Vern to follow him up the slope. With a sigh and a grunt, he started up the rocks. It was going slow. Every other step caused a mini rock slide and would cause him to continually lose his footing. Huffing and puffing on the cool, thin air, my cousin eventually made it to a small landing. It had taken him nearly 45 minutes to get to the spot where he saw the man from below. There was no earthly way anyone could have done that scramble up the hill any faster. Completely exhausted, and very out of breath, Vern sat down on the stone landing. He looked around but couldn't see the man anywhere. As he scanned his surroundings, he saw something odd poking out of the boulder 20 feet over from him. Walking to it, he found a weathered boot. 2 boots, actually. Inside these boots and under the boulder as well were bones. Vern looked around once again for the man but never saw him. Instead of feeling eerie or unnerved, Vern felt a sense of relief wash over him. These emotions weren't his own. What he felt seemed to come from all around him. He marked the spot with his GPS and decided to make his way down and call the authorities. The Lemhi County Sheriff's Office responded, and he led them up the canyon to the body. It took 4 grown men to push the boulder out of the way, and when they did, they found the skeletonized remains of a man. On the body they found hunting equipment and some personal effects. From a credit card in the wallet, they were able to identify the man. He was a bow hunter that had gone missing almost exactly 53 years beforehand. Vern never wanted to be identified to the public or the missing hunter's family. He didn't want recognition for something like that. To him, it was just one of those bizarre mountain stories. He was happy that the family got closure, even if it was half a century later. The only thing that bothered him was the man leading him up the canyon with his strange and sudden disappearance. He had mentioned the waving man to the sheriff but was brushed off. When news reports came out announcing the discovery, several photos of the man were published. Vern was absolutely shocked when he saw them. As in the photos, it was the man that had been leading him up the mountain to the body. It finally made sense to him. The man's distressful look, the constant checking if Vern was following him, the sense of relief he felt when the body was discovered. That man was desperate to get home, and through Vern, he was able to be reunited with his family. I was on the last train heading to a friend's house, making my way through the London Underground late at night. It was nearly midnight when the train pulled into Beacon Tree Station, my stop. The platform was eerily quiet, with only the faint hum of the train and the occasional distant echo breaking the silence. As I stepped off the train and began climbing the stairs, a strange sensation washed over me. It felt as though someone were right behind me, their presence almost tangible. I paused for a moment, trying to shake the feeling, but it only grew stronger. With each step, my heart began to race. Unable to ignore it longer, I spun around quickly, and that is when I saw her. Standing a few steps below me was a girl, a ghost. She had no face, and wore a blank, featureless expanse where her features should have been. Her blonde hair hung limply around her pale shoulders and was dressed in a white, flowing dress that seemed slightly tattered at the edges. I froze in place, my breath caught in my throat. For a moment, all I could do was stare, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. Then pure terror took over. I let out a scream and bolted up the stairs as fast as my legs would take me, and by the time I reached my friend's house, I was still shaking. My heart hadn't stopped pounding, and I could barely get the words out to tell them what had happened. Later that night, I decided to look online to see if anyone else had experienced anything similar. What I found was startling. Beacon Tree Station is supposedly haunted by the spirit of a girl with blonde hair and a white dress and no facial features. It felt surreal for it to be validated. I couldn't believe I had actually seen her. I've been back to Beacon Tree Station a few times since then, but thankfully, I've never seen her since. It happened about 10 years ago. My ex's old complex building had an accident in it, and when I returned from work there were cops and an ambulance out front. She had called me at work to warn me and tell me she was fine, but that they were investigating something. You see, her apartment was at the end of the main floor hall, and there was blood traced along the wall. The cops couldn't reveal much other than it was a self-inflicted incident and that no one in the building was in danger. A few weeks passed and we were getting home from dinner one evening when I was settled on the couch. I felt someone's eyes on me. My ex was in the bathroom behind me, and I looked to the window on my right, and sure enough there was a man standing there in what I later described to police as all in white. When he saw that I noticed him, he raised his hand up as if to say hello. I immediately screamed for my ex, and by the time she came out he was gone. This was in Toronto, in not the nicest of areas, so we called the cops to report the incident, possible intruder or peeping Tom. When the cops came and took our report, they said they were going to do a search of the area and report back. Shortly after they left, they phoned to say that the space between the window and the fence behind it was physically too narrow for someone to squeeze back there. They basically said there was no way I saw anyone. But I was dead sober, and I had never called 911 in my life. I was scared. I know what I saw. A little while after this happened, word got around that a man who was staying with his daughter in the building had taken his own life that night. When I heard that, I couldn't help but think back to the man in the window, in the impossibly small space, who was making contact. Of course, I can't know for sure if the two events were related. I only had the encounter once while my ex was still living there, but still I can't help but feel that the man who passed away was making some sort of connection, but I don't know why. After my dad passed away, he visited me in a dream and told me things I literally had no way of knowing. Here's one of the only things I still remember, but first, context. My dad had 2 daughters with 2 different women before meeting my mum, and while she was aware of them before I was born, my dad had no relationship with either of them, and it was only after his death we learned of their existence. I can't blame my dad for hiding them, as their creations were, well, both traumatizing and wholesome. Let me explain. The oldest was an extremely abusive woman who takes after my grandmother. Grandma pushed the relationship on Dad, then helped the lady baby trap my dad and tried to guilt him into marrying her. While it worked for Grandma, aka this is literally what she did to my grandpa, it led to a very abusive childhood for my dad, so he understandably noped out of that one. The younger one was with a friend of his, though I'm unsure about the level of closeness. She had been in a very serious long-term relationship, but for reasons I don't know, they broke up. She had asked my dad to be her rebound, no strings attached, and he accepted. After they did the deed, she had sudden clarity that her ex was her soulmate, and it wasn't before long they were back together. They soon learned she was pregnant, and it came to light my dad was the father. He wasn't ready to be a dad, and those two wanted a family together anyway. Everyone just kind of agreed to pretend my dad wasn't the father. Okay, yeah, so obviously these aren't things you tell your 10-year-old daughter after he died. Sure, you mentioned the sisters because they might come to the funeral, but you don't explain the situations in which they came to be, nor do you tell them the names of the girls' mothers. There are many things he told me in that dream, and I recounted it all to my mum the next morning. There were lots of details I shouldn't have known, but I did. And these are all things that have been confirmed by multiple people. I don't remember what they were anymore, except for the thing about my sisters, but my mum brings it up all the time. Since then, I've regularly dreamt about people in my life who have passed or who are about to, including pets. Normally they tell me things about their life, any final messages they have, and if they're still alive, they pass within a few days. It's also worth mentioning that my dreams are normally very strange, extremely random, out of their things, so these oddly normal dreams which actually feel so vivid that I can't feel awake are an oddity to me. and they've happened so often and accurately that I can't believe they're anything other than those who have passed or about to, paying me a visit. I used to live with my great aunt while working in the city where she lived. I paid her rent and helped around the house, and she lived alone. She'd been living by herself ever since her husband passed away from a heart attack, and later my cousin, her grandson, died in an accident. My brother would visit and stay the night if my great aunt's health wasn't good. One night I came home late from work and tried to sleep, but I felt uneasy, as if someone was watching me, and I know it sounds cliché. To distract myself, I browsed my phone until I felt tired. Just as I was about to fall asleep, I saw my cousin walk into the room. It was the room he used to stay in before he passed. I jolted upright as he vanished. I tried to dismiss it as my imagination, and eventually managed to fall back asleep. And that night, I dreamt that my cousin was in the house trying to talk to me, but for some reason he couldn't. His accident scars were still visible. The next morning I told my brother, who had also stayed the night, about my experience, and he went pale and said he had a similar dream. Our cousin was trying to talk to him but couldn't. We were both freaked out and told our great aunt. To our shock, she said she had the exact same dream. None of us had any reason to lie, and we hadn't discussed my cousin beforehand. Later we realized that this dream was on the anniversary of his death, which we didn't remember until we checked the date the following day. We did some cleansing rituals after, but that was the experience that turned me into a believer. When I was around 8 or 9 years old, my parents decided to buy a fixer-upper house. It was an old place, a little bit run down but full of potential, or so they thought. We didn't know anything about its history, and at first everything seemed ordinary. But about 2 weeks after we moved in, I started feeling uneasy, like someone was always watching me. This wasn't just a fleeting feeling, it was an intense and physical one. Whenever I felt that presence, it came with a sharp muscle cramp and a heavy pit in my stomach, like the sinking sensation you get when an elevator drops suddenly. I couldn't explain it, but it was like the air in the room grew colder, heavier. Things escalated a few weeks later. One night, my babysitter and I woke up hungry. We decided to sneak into the kitchen for some leftovers, trying not to wake our parents. The house was eerie quiet as we crept down the hallway, our footsteps barely making a sound on the creaky wooden floor. When we stepped into the kitchen, the air felt different, thick, almost oppressive. We had barely made it to the fridge when it happened. Plates flew off the counters and smashed against the walls and floor. It wasn't a slow tumble or a clumsy accident. They were hurled with force, as if thrown by unseen hands. My sister screamed and I froze, too terrified to move. We ran back to our room and huddled together under the blankets, shaking. The next morning we told our parents what had happened, but they didn't believe us. They brushed it off, saying we must have been sleepwalking and accidentally knocked the plates over. No matter how much we insisted that that wasn't the case, they wouldn't listen. After that night, the strange occurrences only got worse. Doors would creak open on their own, even when there was no breeze. Shadows moved in the corners of our vision, and I'd often wake up to the feeling of someone standing at the foot of my bed, though no one was there when I turned on the light. The oppressive presence in the house became a constant. It felt like it was watching us, feeding from our fear. My parents tried to rationalize everything, but deep down, I think they felt it too. When the day finally came for us to move out, I couldn't have been more relieved. As we drove away for the last time, I felt the weight lift from my chest. Whatever had haunted that house stayed behind, and I've never felt anything like it since. I have lived in this house for about 8 years, and during that time I've had countless experiences that feel undeniably paranormal. While I've tried to rationalize some of them, others defy explanation and leave me questioning what's really going on here. One of the most unsettling events happened a few years ago. My friend was visiting and we were bored, so we decided to play hide and seek. My house sits on a large property with plenty of nooks and crannies to hide in, making it perfect for the game. My friend volunteered to be the seeker, while my brother and I found hiding spots. I squeezed myself into a cupboard, while my brother hid behind the garage outside. It didn't take long for my friend to find my brother, and together they started searching for me. At one point, they noticed a shadow moving in the laundry room and assumed it had to be me. My friend approached the laundry door and reached for the handle. But as he tried to open it, he felt a strong force pushing back against him, preventing the door from being opened. What made it even stranger was that all the doors leading outside were closed, and the laundry room doesn't have any windows. We were home alone, and there was no one else in the house who could have been responsible. When they finally managed to open the door, the room was empty. That wasn't the only strange thing about living in this house. There's always an uncomfortable atmosphere, especially in certain rooms, even with the windows open. The air feels heavy, almost suffocating. I sweat excessively here, even in the middle of winter, which doesn't happen anywhere else. And there are the sounds, voices murmuring just out of earshot, like someone having a conversation in the next room. Loud banging noises echoing throughout the house at random times. These noises seem to come from nowhere and happen even when I'm alone. One of the most disturbing experiences happened when I was younger. I was in bed late at night around midnight, and the rest of my family was fast asleep. Out of nowhere, I started hearing loud thuds and what sounds like drilling noises coming from beneath my bed. My heart was racing as I worked up the courage to look under the bed. But when I checked, there was nothing there. My room is on the second floor, so the sound couldn't have been coming from beneath the floorboards either. I thought maybe it was coming from downstairs, but there was nothing unusual when I checked the next day. Another strange thing is waking up with an unexplained mark on my body, usually my stomach. They aren't deep or painful, but I can't figure out how they got there. At first, I thought they might be from the way I was sleeping, but it keeps happening, even when I make sure to lie comfortably. I can't shake the feeling that something or someone unseen is sharing this space with me. I don't know if these spirits or entities are friendly, neutral, or something else entirely. I've considered recording an investigation, but I don't know where to start. If anyone has any advice or what to do, whether it's understanding the spirit's intentions or trying to figure out how to deal with them, I'd appreciate any help. Should I try to communicate with them? Or will it only make things worse? I was living at my mum's house with her, my dog, my sister, and my younger son, who wasn't even walking yet. The house was a 3-level home, and from the moment I moved in, there was an unsettling vibe. Strange things would happen regularly, and there was a constant oppressive feeling of being watched, especially when you were in the house alone or on one of the floors by yourself. It started subtly. I'd hear footsteps outside my bedroom door, slow and deliberate, even when I knew no one was home. Once, while sitting alone in my room, I felt the distinct sensation of someone lightly touching the back of my head. It wasn't imagined. It was real enough to send chills down my spine. The experiences weren't isolated to me. My sister once told me that she had stayed in my room while I was away at college and had the most horrifying encounter. She said she was assaulted by an unseen entity and described hearing it whisper in her ear saying, "Yeasty infection." To this day I have no idea what it meant or if it was somehow referencing a yeast infection she may have had. It was so bizarre and disturbing that it became one of the strangest moments tied to that house. But my scariest experience happened in the upstairs bathroom. My mum had just finished showering and I went in after her. The mirror was still fogged up from the steam, but there was something written on it. The words, "Help me," were scrawled across the glass in large, clear letters. My heart dropped. I froze for a moment, staring at the words before panic set in. I rushed out of the bathroom, tears streaming down my face, and confronted my mum. "Did you write that on the mirror?" I asked her, almost pleading for a rational explanation. She looked genuinely confused and swore she hadn't. I couldn't shake the eerie feeling, and for years, it haunted me. 3 years later, I brought it up again, hoping maybe she'd confess to playing some kind of prank. But her answer remained the same. She hadn't written it. The bathroom mirror wasn't the only odd occurrence. On several occasions, we found dirty, baby-sized handprints on the same mirror. At first, my mum assumed I had placed my son's hands on the mirror while playing, but I knew I hadn't. My son couldn't even walk yet, let alone reach up to leave those prints. Years later, my mum admitted she'd also seen similar handprints on other surfaces, like the dining room table. She never had an explanation, but made us both wonder what kind of presence we had been living with at that house. Several years ago, I had a strange and unsettling experience that still lingers in my mind. It was a warm evening, and I was on the second-floor balcony with my cousin, just chatting and relaxing. We were in the middle of a casual conversation when out of nowhere, we both heard a loud, raspy male voice scream. It wasn't just a faint sound. It was as if the sound was coming from right between us, hovering in the air close enough that we could feel the tension of its presence. The voice itself had this unnatural, guttural quality to it, like something wasn't quite right. It was sharp and abrasive and sent immediate chills down our spines. Without missing a beat, we both turned to look at each other, eyes wide with shock. The realization dawned on us almost instantly. The sound hadn't come from any of our nearby neighbors. There were no speakers or devices that could have caused it, and no other logical explanation we could grasp. It was just there, something that didn't belong, something that neither of us could understand. We were both left standing there in stunned silence, processing what had just happened. Years later, I was talking to my cousin about that night, and I asked him if he remembered the incident, and without hesitation he replied he did, with a tone of recognition that almost seemed to echo my own disbelief. When I asked him if he could explain it, he went quiet for a moment, and then, almost uncomfortably, admitted he didn't want to discuss it further, but he confirmed without a doubt that it had happened exactly as I remembered it, with the same eerie voice and same lingering tension between us. This left me wondering, could there be any reason other than a mere prank to spook us for a laugh? Or was it something, perhaps, otherworldly? The voice wasn't just an ordinary sound, it felt like it had intention behind it, as if it was trying to communicate or perhaps provoke some kind of response. But why us? Why that moment? I've always been curious and unsettled as to what it could have been. For some context, my partner's family has always had some unsettling energy to it, one that I can't quite shake off. Over the time I've spent there, I've had several strange experiences that led me to believe the place might be haunted. There have been several moments where I've heard my name whispered directly in my ear, the voice so close that it felt like someone was standing right next to me, but when I turned around, no one was there. I've also seen dark, shadowy figures, often in the corner of my vision, that appeared too detailed and too real to be mere tricks of the light. At times it feels like I'm being watched, and the sensation can range from something that makes me feel anxious and on edge to something oddly comforting and almost protective. It's like there's a presence that's been there for a long time, one that's aware of me. Recently, my partner has been experiencing some very strange occurrences themselves. This week, they've been waking up at odd hours of the night, 2, 3, and 5 a.m., which is completely out of character for them. They're typically a super deep sleeper, so this sudden pattern of waking up at these exact times feels like something more than a coincidence. Last night, however, things escalated. They woke up to the sound of their bedroom door opening. This door has always been a bit sticky, so it makes a distinct creaking sound when it moves. At first, they thought it was their stepfather coming into the room, but when they look up, they saw someone standing in the doorway, an older man wearing a white shirt and blue jeans. The figure was blurry enough that they couldn't make out his face, but the outline was clear enough to give them the impression of a man entering the room. The door creaked as it closed behind him, and in that moment my partner felt a sense of confusion, thinking it was their stepfather. But then things took a bizarre turn. The older man didn't just stand there, he moved in an odd, almost unnatural way. He walked through the walls into the adjacent bedroom, their sister's room, and as he passed through the wall, the figure seemed to almost vaporize, disappearing into thin air, as if he wasn't entirely solid. It was like watching someone fade into the ether. Naturally, my partner's instinct was to check their phone, so they grabbed to turn on the flashlight, but when they looked around, there was nothing. The room was empty. The door was closed just as it had been before. The feeling of cold dread lingered, and they were left wondering if they had actually seen something, or if it was just a trick of the mind. While I'm less inclined to jump straight to the idea of sleep paralysis, or a sleep-related hallucination because my partner was moving around while this was happening, it's hard to ignore the feeling that something unexplainable was going on. Sleep paralysis typically involves being unable to move, but my partner was fully mobile during the experience, and the vividness of the figure they saw was different from what I've heard others describe when it comes to sleep paralysis demons. This felt more physical, more real. I'm curious to think what others can make of this. This happened to me about 15 years ago just outside of Vancouver, British Columbia. I was out eating dinner with my father and his friend, a casual night with good conversation. After dinner, we decided to head back to my father's house. We had parked in 2 different spots at the restaurant, so my father drove his car and I ended up riding with his friend. I was fine when we left, feeling normal and relaxed after a nice meal. But things quickly took a strange turn. About halfway home, I suddenly began to feel awful. It came on so fast and out of nowhere. One minute I was perfectly fine, and the next I was overwhelmed with a sense of nausea and dread. I didn't have any time to process what was happening before I told my father's friend to pull over. I quickly got out the car, stumbled to the side and puked. But then, just as suddenly as it came on, it was gone. The feeling of sickness and dread abated, like nothing had happened. It was bizarre, there was no lingering discomfort, no aftertaste of what had caused it. I felt fine, again. Like it was a strange, fleeting moment that had never existed. We continued on our way, reaching my father's house shortly after. His property was on a steep, sloped mountainside, so his driveway was really steep. Twisting upwards as we pulled up the drive, something happened that I'll never forget. My father's friend slammed on the brakes, his eyes wide with fear, and I could feel my heart rate spike in response. In the headlights right in front of us was what looked like a woman. I couldn't see her face, but I could see her long hair cascading down to her knees, floating all around. She was wearing a white dress with frills, but there was something deeply unsettling about her. She had no feet. She was floating, gliding about a foot or so above the ground, moving from right to left, as if she were drifting by us. Whatever it was appeared solid enough to be highlighted by the car's headlights, but I couldn't make out any real detail. No face, just long hair and that eerily flowing dress. It passed by quickly, almost as if it was in a rush to disappear, and both of us were frozen in shock. Neither of us said anything for a moment. The air felt heavy, and the night suddenly seemed much darker. My father's friend was visibly shaken, and I didn't know what to think. We continued up the driveway, both of us silent, and once we got inside the house, we thought the strange moment was over. But it wasn't. It wasn't about 10 minutes later, when my father's friend rushed to the washroom and I could hear him vomiting. He came out pale and rattled, barely able to speak. He hadn't mentioned feeling sick before we saw her, but now he was affected as I had been earlier, as though some invisible force had followed us home. I still think about it to this day, and it creeps me out every time I do. What did we see? Was it a spirit, an apparition? I've tried looking up similar experiences, but nothing quite matches what we encountered that night. A floating woman in the white dress with no feet. She was real enough to be caught in the car's headlights. But what was she? And why does she seem to affect us in such a profound way, even after we'd driven past her? Has anyone ever experienced anything like this? I'd love an explanation, as it still haunts me. It was my first place, a small studio apartment that I had just moved into. The place was simple, sparsely furnished with just the basics, a couch, TV, and one of those old 90s halogen floor lamps with a dimmer switch. It was cozy, and I had been spending a lot of time there getting settled in and enjoying the solitude. The apartment felt quite peaceful, until that night. I was sitting on the couch just minding my own business, the TV was off, and the only sound was the hum of the apartment building's air conditioning in the distance. It was one of those moments where you're completely alone, with no distractions, just the faint buzz of the world around you. I was probably scrolling on my phone when the halogen floor lamp, the one I had barely touched since moving in, began to flicker. It was like the bulb had a mind of its own, and without warning, the brightness on the lamp shot up to the highest setting, blindingly bright, like someone had cranked the dimmer switch all the way up. I froze. It was so sudden and so loud that it almost felt like the light itself had a presence, like it was trying to get my attention. But that wasn't the worst part. At the exact moment the light hit its blinding peak, I heard it, a deep, bellowing laugh. It wasn't just any laugh, it was a voice, a woman's voice, loud and forceful, as though someone was standing right there in the room with me. The laugh was so clear, so real, that it sent a cold wave of dread through my chest. It didn't echo or fade. It was crisp and unmistakable, like it had come from the air itself. I felt it in my bones, the way it seemed to fill the entire room, pressing in on me. The laugh wasn't warm or inviting. It was sinister, like something mocking me, like it had been waiting to make its presence known. I sat there frozen for what felt like an eternity. The laugh lingered for a moment before it stopped abruptly, leaving only the deafening silence in its wake. My heart was pounding in my ears. I wanted to move, to turn around, but something in me told me not to. The light, still at its brightest setting, almost felt like it was waiting, as if something else was about to happen. I glanced around the room, my eyes darting to every corner looking for any explanation, but there was nothing. No one was there. The door was locked. The windows were closed. I was completely alone. The laugh didn't make sense. It didn't belong. I quickly stood up, my legs shaky, and I rushed over to the lamp as if turning it off could somehow reset whatever had just happened. My hand hovered over the dimmer switch with a quick twist. The light flickered back down to normal, a soft glow. The apartment felt heavier, colder, like something had shifted in the air. I stood there for a while staring at the lamp, as if waiting for something else to happen. But nothing did. I didn't sleep much that night. All small noises made me jump, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't really alone. The laugh, the sudden burst of light. It all felt like a warning, like something had just been trying to remind me that I was in its space and not the other way around. Maybe it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. Or perhaps something else entirely. I moved out not long after, but every time I think about it, that laugh echoes in my mind. Lately, I've been seeing a shadow from the corner of my eye, but I didn't think much of it at first. I figured it was just sleep deprivation, maybe my mind playing tricks on me. But today, something happened that made me stop and really think about it. I was having a discussion with my two brothers, just talking and catching up, when I happened to glance over into the kitchen. In that moment I saw it, a shadow human-sized, darting across the kitchen. It was fast, almost too quick to make sense, but it was there. I was genuinely surprised, and without thinking I asked my brother, "Did you see that?" He turned to look at me, his expression matching mine, shock. He confirmed that he had seen something too, but only like in his peripheral vision, like I had in the past. I, on the other hand, had seen it clearly in full view, and that was the thing that really threw me off. What made it even stranger was that no one was in the kitchen at the time. If it had been anyone, we would have heard them, especially since the kitchen is right by the living room where we were talking. The kitchen was completely empty. My other brother didn't see anything at all and suggested it might have been a bug or something else, but that didn't make any sense to me. It couldn't have been anyone else, and I knew it. I know this might sound like a minor thing, maybe even a little silly, but it was enough to make me stop and wonder. It's not a big dramatic story, just a moment that left me with more questions than answers, and I'll probably forget about it eventually, but for now, it's just one of those strange things I needed to get off my chest. I live in a townhouse, and my neighbor practices voodoo. Last summer, I had an experience that I can't explain. Let me take you back. It was just a typical afternoon, and she was sitting across the street on the curb watching her two kids play in the street. I went outside to take the trash. My townhouse has two doors, the first a storm door, and the second the main door to the house. As I opened my storm door, something strange occurred. I was looking over at them, and I could see her house. Her door across the street opened by itself. It moved slowly, not with the wind, but as if it were being gently pulled. The door opened all the way, and then after a brief pause, it slowly shut again. I stood there for a moment, trying to figure out what had just happened. I looked over at her, expecting her to notice, but she was still sitting on the curb, completely unaware. She didn't even look up. There was no reaction from her. That's when I felt it. I couldn't see anything, but there was a presence beside me. It was as if someone was standing right next to me. But when I looked, there was nothing there. I couldn't explain it, but I could feel it. The feeling wasn't threatening, just there. It stayed for about 30 seconds, maybe a little more, before it vanished. It wasn't sudden. It just faded, and the sensation of being watched disappeared. Later, I remembered that my neighbor practiced voodoo and had been working with energies recently. She hadn't completely closed her circle, and I wonder if that had something to do with what happened. Could the spirits have come from that and made the door open in that way? I guess I'll never know. Back in 1982, my family had just moved to California from New York. My dad was very close friends with William Peter Blatty, the author of The Exorcist. As a kid, I spent a lot of time at Bill's house, a fascinating and slightly eerie place given his work. Around that time, my grandmother had passed away suddenly, which was still fresh in our minds. One evening, we were visiting Bill's house, and he and my dad were upstairs in Bill's office experimenting with some audio equipment. Bill had a setup for recording EVPs, essentially capturing potential spirit voices. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was 12 and more interested in playing a video game in another room. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a strange, almost otherworldly voice coming through the speakers. It called out clear as day, "Nikki, Red." My heart stopped. That was my grandmother's nickname for my grandfather, and it wasn't something anyone outside the family would know. I bolted into the living room where everyone was freaking out, trying to figure out what had just happened. At that moment, my dad and Bill walked in, startled by the commotion. They explained they'd been recording upstairs, and there's no way Bill could have faked it. He didn't even know the nickname. To this day, I can still hear the voice in my mind, and it never fails to give me chills. Years later, when I was in my 20s, I had another strange encounter. At the time, I was living at home, and my bedroom was tucked away at the end of a small, dark, alley-like space. The room itself was dim and a little eerie, but I never thought much of it. I always wore my grandmother's wedding band on a chain, a keepsake that made me feel connected to her. One night, I took it off and placed it in my dresser, as I always did. The next morning it was gone. I searched everywhere, every drawer, every corner of the room, but it had simply vanished. I was devastated, thinking I had somehow lost it forever. Then, about a week later, it reappeared. I walked into my room and there it was, sitting right on top of my TV in plain sight. I asked everyone in the house if they had moved it, but no one had touched it. It was baffling, but I was relieved to have it back. Not long after, something even stranger happened. One night I woke up suddenly, the room dimly lit by the bluish glow of my alarm clock. Sitting at the edge of my bed was a man quietly watching me. He wasn't solid, more like a faint silhouette, but I could make out enough detail to see he was wearing a suit, something that seemed straight out of the 1940s. I jolted upright, and just like that, he was gone. I tried to convince myself it was just a vivid dream, but then it happened again a few days later. This time I woke up, sat up abruptly and saw him again. He looked at me for a moment before slowly fading away, like smoke dissolving into the air. Oddly enough, I wasn't scared. He didn't feel threatening, more like he was simply curious. Maybe he was tied to that room, or perhaps drawn to me in some way. But I never did see him again after that. I sometimes wonder what he witnessed while I lived there. Those were my wild, carefree years after all. I've had several unsettling experiences while growing up in my father's home, but this one stands out, even more than the time I actually saw a spirit. My parents had split up, so my brother and I would travel to my dad's farm on the weekends. I was 11 at the time, and I spent most of my weekends cleaning, doing laundry, and helping my dad with household chores, especially since he spent a lot of time working in the fields during the summer. One afternoon, my dad and brother had left the house for a while. I had just finished cleaning the bathroom and was sitting on my bed folding laundry. My back was to the doorway and everything seemed normal. Then out of nowhere, a deep sense of fear washed over me. It was so intense it froze me in place. I felt as if someone was standing directly behind me, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I could hear in my head, "Do not turn around, do not turn around." I couldn't move, I couldn't speak. I was paralyzed with fear for what felt like at least 2 minutes. It was as though whatever was standing behind me was urging me not to turn around, and I was doing everything I could to resist the overwhelming urge to look. Then, Just as suddenly as the feeling had come, it vanished. It felt like whatever was behind me had given up. Perhaps because I had refused to look. But before I could even process what had just happened, I heard a long, loud, scraping sound coming from the bathroom. It took me a minute to gather enough courage to check it out. The bathroom was right next to my bedroom, so to get out of the room I had to pass it. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I forced myself to walk past the bathroom door, my eyes nervously flicking towards it. When I stepped into the bathroom, my blood ran cold. My dad's shaving cream, which had been neatly placed on the counter just moments before, was now dragged halfway off the edge. It was hanging precariously, half on the counter, half dangling off the side like someone had pulled it. I had just cleaned the bathroom and made sure everything on the counter was lined up against the backsplash so there was no logical explanation for it. I didn't waste another second in that house. I ran out of there so fast, not even stopping to grab anything. I waited outside until my dad and brother came home, and I didn't go back until they returned. It may not sound like much, but the terror I felt in that moment left me shaken, and the fear lingered for long after the event, and I had trouble sleeping for several days after that. A month ago, I had to deal with probably the hardest thing I have ever had to deal with up until this point in my life. My once best friend and ex-fiancé overdosed on fentanyl and passed. We broke up a little over 5 years ago due to his addiction. I am not one who ever has or ever will use drugs, but sadly he fell down that path. We did not end things on a bad note, however. After years and years of attempting to help him get over his addiction, including but not limited to rehabs, clinics, therapists, support groups, I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't stand the lies. I couldn't stand the BS. Most of all, I couldn't stand watching him slowly end his own life. It was his addiction that really helped me understand the famous saying, if you truly love someone, sometimes you have to let them go. This is exactly what happened. I was afraid I was enabling him by saying if things didn't change, I would have to end things and not act on it. Right before we broke up, I gave him an ultimatum, which was to either make a real effort to change by leaving his triggers behind and work towards bettering himself emotionally, mentally, physically, and professionally, which I would support, or respect that this was not the life I wanted and it was time we end things. He gave me the most honest answer any addict could give, which was, I want to change, but I can't promise you I can. And I understand where you're coming from and I will respect your wishes. As hard as it was to end things, we did. At the time, I was living 100 miles away from him because I was in college, and though he had a lot of his property in my apartment, he stayed with his parents because he had a bar job near their home, which was really where he would get the drugs. He drove down to have this conversation, but it was after midnight when he arrived. I asked him to take his cat home, gave him my ring, and said I would pack up his stuff and arrange for him to come and pick it up. He agreed. We cuddled for about half an hour and talked a bit, then he grabbed his cat and left. One of the last things I told him before he left was to never let me get the call that he had died. He laughed and told me that would never happen. After that, I never saw him again. His mum called me a few days later and said he went to inpatient. She then started saying she and his father would be coming down to grab his stuff when I was ready for them to do so. His family and I got on wonderfully, and we still do, so I was happy to have them come down and arrange for it to happen a few weeks later. When they came down, I helped them move his items out. As I was loading their truck, his mum and I were talking, and she thanked me for everything, as well as reiterating that she did not blame me one bit for leaving. She prayed that he would get clean and live a full life, to which I agreed, and I told her I don't ever want to get back with him, but I want to see him live a happy, full life, and hoped that we could be best friends again one day. Time passed and we both moved on. I met an incredible man at school who I'm still with today. He met another sweet woman who he had a kid with. Sadly, they didn't work out. However, he dated multiple sweet ladies, including the sweet lady he was with when he passed away. I would periodically get texts from him over the years and thought I would reply. I was definitely not the talker between the two of us because I never wanted to give him false hopes that we would get back together. In addition, I would hear through the grapevine periodically that he was still using, which his pictures on social media supported because I could see it on his face and in his eyes. This is when things got weird. On Friday, December 16th, I got the call that I was always fearing I would get. Our friend from Hawaii, where we lived for 4 of the 6 years we were together, called me to tell me he had overdosed and was in a coma. What was crazy was that I turned off my Facebook Messenger notices a few weeks earlier because I was getting so many notifications. Yet before this call came in, his brother and sister-in-law tried to message me on there. I, of course, lost it. Our friend said he was flying out to stay with his family and see him in the hospital. I told him we'll talk more when he gets there. The next day, our Hawaii friend texted me to tell me that he was coming in on Monday and said his mum said there was no sign of brain activity, but they had to run more tests. It was this night when things started to get strange. I woke up around 2:30 a.m. from a dead sleep, and I felt him leave. It was a feeling I've never felt before, and I knew right then and there that he was gone. I knew he wasn't coming back. The next day I called a few other people who we knew in Hawaii that did not know what had happened to tell him that he was in a coma and that we were not sure if he was going to make it. As I was talking to one of our other mutual friends, I suddenly felt that I was about to get a call that he was officially dead. And within 2 to 3 minutes, I had another call come in. It was my ex's brother-in-law. I answered and said, "Is this that call?" And he mumbled, "Yeah, I'm so sorry, sweetheart." "Okay, thank you. Love you, bro." He told me he loved me too, and we hung up. That night, I woke up at 3:30 from a dead sleep and heard his laugh, clear as day, in the living room. He had a very unique laugh that I could recognize anywhere, and I couldn't go back to sleep. I was in tears. I knew he was there. Later that day, my boyfriend and I started packing for a trip we were getting ready to go on the following week for Christmas. My boyfriend had his Spotify on, and eventually it started playing random songs that were similar to his playlist. 3 of my favorite songs that my ex would play, as he was a musician, came on in a row. It tripped me out so much I went and restarted the playlist midway through the 3rd song. The next day I went to the store to grab a few last-minute gifts and toiletries for our trip. As I was in the store, the same 3 songs that were played the day before, in the same order, began to play. When the 3rd song came on, I dropped my items and just left. That night, I woke up from a dead sleep at 3:30, but this time, it was because I felt someone sitting at the end of the bed. I knew he was there. I didn't go back to sleep. The next day, my boyfriend and I flew out for our holiday trip. We landed in Vegas because it was the closest airport to our destination, and I had never been to Vegas, so we toured the strip before going to where we needed to be. I was having so much fun and getting lost in life. And guess what starts playing in one of the casinos? The same 3 songs in the same order. I was freaked out. I couldn't believe it. Things settled for about a week, with the exception of waking up every night at 3:30 a.m. precisely. This time, though, I would not hear, sense, or see anything. I would just wake up. The day we were getting ready to head home, my boyfriend's brother was driving us to the airport. And guess what comes on the radio? The same 3 songs, in the exact same order. By this point, I already accepted it was him. His funeral was the day after we got home, to which I attended. His family was happy to see me, our friends for Hawaii were happy I was there as well, and many of our mutual friends were there too. All in all, I was glad I went, but it was hard. I had a couple of nights where I slept through the night, and then he started to appear in my dreams. The first times I shrugged it off as grief. The third time he appeared in my dream, I could not dismiss it as grief. He kept telling me that I needed to try hard cider with whiskey as we sat in a recording studio with two of our other friends who passed years prior. I kept trying to tell a group outside of the room something through loudspeakers, but kept getting interrupted by my ex and our other deceased friends. When I woke up, I couldn't stop thinking about the drink. I reached out to my friend from Hawaii who was staying on my ex's family farm later in the day and asked him, without any context, "Do you have a thing with hard cider and whiskey?" He laughed and was like, "Yeah bro, why?" This was not a thing I knew about, and it was definitely not a thing when my ex and I were together. It was so trippy and I was like, okay. After this I started to wake up every night at 3:30 a.m. until last night. Last night I had the craziest dream of all of them. My ex and I were in this random hotel room in Vegas talking. He then started to talk about my current boyfriend, but not in the way that was uncomfortable, more like he wanted to know him. I told him how happy he and I were, and that I think we were the best thing that ever happened to each other. He smiled and told me he was happy for me, and that all he wanted was for me to be happy. He asked if we could lay down and cuddle with him though, and I said I would, but nothing naughty, because it was not fair to my boyfriend. He said okay, we did. He whispered in my ear and told me that he would always love me, always be happy, and never give up, and change the world. Then I woke up. Today has been rather crazy. I have been presented with 3 incredible opportunities out of the blue, 1 academic and 2 professional, all of which I'm considering and taking the next steps to apply for, and all of which would allow me to build up on my life-saving research project. In addition, I got a random message on LinkedIn from someone asking me if my current employer is hiring, which I verified they are. I didn't want to leave my current employer stranded when I moved on to bigger and better things. I cannot say if this was him, or if it's all in my head, but somehow I feel a sense of peace. I know that he always cared for me and I will always care for him, but we were on 2 different paths in the world. I don't feel scared, I no longer feel alone. I have my best friend back, I have part of my old group back. They're just spirits, which I'm totally okay with, and in some ways, happier, because they're always there. I know some may dismiss this, but maybe my story will bring a sense of peace to others. Death is not the end, it's just another form of life. I don't understand it, but I don't fear it. All I know is that having my spirit homies is badass, and though it sucks they died, I'm glad that they're still around me. I used to run a small stall in a bustling market in Juarez, known locally as a segunda. These markets were a lively mix of stalls, selling both new and used goods, and I made my living offering handmade crafts and clothing. My stall was filled with quartz crystals, small statues of Buddhas, saints, and other spiritual items. I also sold clothes made from manta, a beautiful lightweight fabric, dresses, blouses, and suits that people seemed to love. One day a young woman approached my stall. She lingered for a moment, her eyes scanning its items on display, before asking if she could sit and talk. There was something about her presence that felt different. I had a small table where I always kept a lit candle and a glass of water for protection, rituals I maintained out of respect for the energies I often encountered. She introduced herself as a medium, though she didn't say much more about her abilities. I wasn't sure if she knew that I, too, was sensitive to spirits, but I had a feeling she did. As we began to talk, the energy around us shifted. Her voice suddenly changed, and that's when I realized this conversation wasn't going to be ordinary. She started to channel spirits. At first, the spirits that came through were young and tragic, each saying how they had passed, each one heartbreaking. And then a different one arrived. I couldn't see her physically, but I sensed her with absolute clarity. She came into the focus of my mind's eye, a little girl with her head tilted to one side. I could picture her dress, simple and delicate, and the way she carried herself. I decided to speak to her. "Hey, your dress is really pretty." She smiled faintly and replied, "Isn't it?" "Yeah, it's beautiful." "Aren't I pretty?" Her question made my heart ache. I nodded gently. "Yes, but why is your head tilted like that?" "Because of the rope," she said simply. I hesitated, unsure how to proceed, but pressed on. "Was it your own doing?" "Yes." A deep sadness settled over me as I asked, "Can you tell me what happened?" She explained that at school the other children teased her relentlessly. They called her ugly and mocked her clothes. The constant bullying had left her feeling worthless and hopeless. Her words were filled with the kind of sorrow that no child should ever experience. I tried to comfort her as best I could. "I have a candle and a glass of water. Please take them with you on your journey, and go to your mum, give her a kiss and ask her for forgiveness." "But I don't know where I am. I can't see my own finger. It's too dark. And the last moment of my life, I have to relive it over and over." I swallowed the lump in my throat and asked, "When will you be able to go?" "Not until the day I was supposed to die." My heart broke for her. I wanted to help, to offer some kind of solace. "What's your name? I'll pray for you." She spoke her name, but the voice was no longer hers. It was deep, cold, and unnatural, carrying a darkness that seemed to fill the air. "Marta." The sound sent shivers down my spine. It wasn't just a name. It felt like something ugly and ominous had taken hold of her. It was the most unsettling moment I've ever experienced in all my years of connecting with spirits. Despite my fears, I promised her I would pray for her, hoped with all my heart that wherever she was, her suffering would come to an end. And after that day, the young woman who had claimed to the stall never returned. I am an online student, so most of my days are spent in my room, which is tucked away at the end of a long hallway. I always leave my door open. It makes the space feel less isolated and helps me feel connected to the rest of the house, even when I'm deep in my work. Yesterday morning started off like any other. I was sitting on my desk, focused on an assignment, when my dog, as usual, came bounding up the stairs to see me. She's a lively, affectionate companion, and her daily visits are one of my favorite parts of studying from home. She leapt onto my bed, wagging her tail, but then she did something unusual which caught my attention. Instead of looking at me or settling down, she froze and turned towards the hallway. Her ears perked up, and she started to tremble. Then she began barking, loud, relentless barks directed at the empty corridor. At first I thought maybe she'd heard a noise or spotted something outside, but the intensity of her reaction was unlike anything I'd seen before. Normally, if she gets startled, I can calm her down by speaking to her or redirecting her attention. But this time nothing worked. Her eyes stayed locked on the hallway, and she wouldn't even glance in my direction. I tried to reassure her, but her barking only grew more frantic. It was just the two of us at home, so I decided to check the hallway myself. I stood in the doorway and scanned the space, expecting to find something, maybe a shadow, a strange light, or even an object out of place. But it was just the same dark, empty stretch of hallway, as always, silent and still. Her barking continued for nearly an hour, echoing through the house and sending chills down my spine. The only thing that finally snapped her out of it was when my grandmother arrived. Even then, she stayed close to me, her body tense, her eyes darting nervously towards the hallway. She wouldn't leave my room, and it was clear she was still unsettled by whatever had spooked her. What made this experience even more unsettling is the fact that my family and I have a history of ghost hunting. It's something we've done together over the years, always taking precautions to protect ourselves. Before and after every investigation, we set boundaries, making it clear that nothing is allowed to attach to us or follow us home. We even sage the house as an extra layer of protection. However, it's been quite a while since we last saged the house. I can't help but wonder if something might have slipped through the cracks. Maybe whatever my dog sensed had been lingering unnoticed until now. Animals are known to pick up on things human can't, and her reaction felt too intense to ignore. Now I'm considering whether it's time to sage the house again to ensure that our space is clear and safe, whether my dog was reacting to something supernatural or just something beyond my understanding. The experience left me unsettled. Whatever it was, I'm grateful for her sharp instincts and her unwavering determination to protect me from the unseen. I've had many ghost experiences, but I was told from a young age that I shouldn't fear them, for they were once flesh and blood like us. Once it happened when we all went to bed. I remember it clearly because my sisters experienced it with me. We're triplets, and at the time, we'd newly moved back into our childhood home after leaving Dad behind, so we had just about nothing except for important items. One bunk bed and a bed on the ground, and we decided to switch from our normal beds. That night I slept on the bed on the ground and remembered the room being completely dark. We were next to a very large window and the moon was out, but there was no light except darkness and a weight against my chest. I woke up to see a snout of a dog inches away from my face, but from its teeth and its heavy breath, it was a wolf. I woke up to see the snout of a dog inches from my face, but from its teeth and its heavy breath, I could tell it wasn't a dog at all, but a wolf. A dark shadow of a wolf with only the face taken shape, as the rest of its body was in darkness. I heard my sisters calling to me, and it made the wolf lay its full weight on top of me, revealing the room. Wolves surrounded our bedroom as a pack watching us. I saw the three were surrounded in the bottom bunk where my older sister lay, and she kept holding their gaze. My younger sister on the top bunk had two wolves lying her down, and she couldn't move. None of them could. We called for my mother who was next door, but Mum never woke because she couldn't hear us. I know for a fact if Mum heard one peep from either me or my sisters that sounded like a cry, she'd be busting the door down. But this was something that wanted to be acknowledged. The wolf holding me down laid his head on my belly, with his ears pinned back, and all of a sudden, I pet his head like I would any dog. Instantly the weight lifted, and I busted out of my bed running to my sisters checking. We still couldn't explain it, except that it happened, and all three of us experienced it. The second time, I'm sure it was his spirit. This is when I was 26 and back from my father's funeral service. He met a very sudden but tragic end, which my mum had warned him about, but he never listened. After the funeral, I was not in the best of headspaces since he and I practically cut ties, because I thought life is better with my father being away from me, but he was still my dad. I was awake watching One Piece and all I was doing was crying. At the foot of my bed, I felt it shake like someone was at the end, holding it, trying to shake it. I didn't care when I noticed, and casually got up from my bed and opened my bedroom door to see a shadow man standing right in front of my face. It was a full-body man, taller than the fridge behind it. It backed away from me when I walked into the dark hallway and closed the door behind me as I needed the restroom and didn't care that the spirit was wanting a reaction out of me. It was standing and tried to corner me, but I just looked at its dark face. I scoffed and closed the door and went back to bed with the TV on. I have no idea what or why that would have happened. I simply walked on. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I didn't want to say this at the end of the first story, I'd rather leave it here, but there is actually a link to a news article about the discovery of the body, and extra information which you can read up about if you are so inclined. The link is of course in the description. I really hope that you enjoyed these stories. I have so many more in store for you. I think we're going to have a really good time. Why am I doing Ghost Week? Well, as many of you probably know by now, I usually do 100 ghost stories on Halloween, but I was honestly so focused on trying to get the 50 scary stories from the USA out that it kind of took priority. And even though I published it late because it was just such a big video to do, I had the stories, the video was just kind of pushed more to the side, and I really wanted to get these stories out to you, and so here they are, for a week-long festival of phantoms. Alright then guys, I'd like to extend a final huge thank you to my members and patrons. Their help financially really means the world to me, especially in these challenging YouTube times. So if you're interested in bonus content, that's where it is. But until next time, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.